Good morning, dear students. Welcome to this class on Laura Mulvey's essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which was published in the journal Screen in the year 1975. This Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, and later on, this essay was included in her book Visual and Other Pleasures, which was published in 2009. It was reprinted at that point of time. So the essay that we are going to learn is Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, where Laura Mulvey talks about how the unconscious of the patriarchal society structures the film right from the olden times. And then she uses psychoanalysis as a political weapon to analyze, make a deep analysis of narrative cinema. No, we'll read the essay because I have already posted a few videos which the gist of that the essay is there, but as it is a detailed text, we'll read the essay. So I hope you have the copy with you. And the first part, that is the introduction. Part A political use of psychoanalysis. So she begins the essay by giving an outline of what she's going to do. This paper intends to use psychoanalysis to discover where and how the fascination of film is reinforced by pre-existing patterns of fascination already at work within the individual subject and the social formations that have molded in. It takes a starting point, the way film reflects, reveals, and even plays on the straight, socially established interpretation of sexual difference, which controls images, erotic ways of looking, and spectacle. So, the first is she says, she's adopting the methodology of psychoanalysis to discover what is she trying to discover or make or trying to demonstrate. One is how the pre-existing patterns of fascination, you are fascinated with something, you're fascinated with certain images, certain erotic images, certain things. So how that fascination is controlled by the patriarchy, or how it is, how patriarchy structures the whole thing. And then she says even the individual subject, what we feel, what an individual subject feels, that is also controlled by an unconscious, by something else, something bigger than that. And how we are how certain social formations have molded the individual subject. And then she moves on to say that there are socially accepted ways or established interpretation of sexual difference which controls certain images, erotic ways of looking at, and spectacle. So one thing you need to make it clear is that the way a woman watches erotic images on the screen, especially in narrative cinema, is different from a man seeing that image. When we read the essay further, you will get to know how what controls these ways of looking at, different ways of looking at, and how you are fascinated with certain things and you are not fascinated with certain things. It is helpful to understand what the cinema has been and how its magic has worked in the past while attempting a theory and a practice which will challenge the cinema of the past. Psychoanalytic theory is thus appropriate here as a political weapon. So you can mark this point as well, demonstrating the way the unconscious of patriarchal society has structured the film form. You can mark this sentence. That is the main agenda of this essay. The paradox of phallocentrism in all its manifestations is that it depends on the image of the castrated woman to give order and meaning to its world. And then Laura Mulvey moves on to talk about why phallocentrism thrives, and on what grounds. On what grounds? On the grounds of castration and on the grounds of the image of the castrated woman. So phallocentrism, as you all know, is the how the society is phallocentric, which centers around the male organ, or what do you call, centers around man. And she says, and the crux of this, or it is based on the image of a castrated woman who lacks the male organ to give order and meaning to the world. So it means that what gives meaning and order to the world according to the patriarchal ideology, it is the phallus, which gives order and meaning to the world, and the woman is lacking that phallus, and this phallocentrism thrives on that. An idea of woman stands as linchpin to the system. It is her lack, and it is in relation to that lack that phallocentrism plays its role. It is her lack that produces the phallus as a symbolic presence, and it is her desire to make good the lack that the phallus signifies. So, according to the patriarchal ideology, this phallus signifies order, something good, and the woman who is devoid of that phallus should work hard to make up for that lack, make up for that absence of phallus. Did you get it? And that is why she has to please others. She is made to please others through her look or something, whatever she does, it should cover the lack that she possesses. She should try work hard to to make up for that loss, which that is the phallus, which signifies law and order, the symbolic presence of the phallus. It is a desire to make good the lack that the phallus signifies. Recent writing in screen about psychoanalysis and cinema has not sufficiently. Screen is the name of the British film journal, where many articles came up on psychoanalysis, and Laura Mulvey is saying that those articles did not actually look at this element of fascination with those images of a woman, of scopophilia and so on. So she says, the cinema has not sufficiently brought out the importance of the representation of the female form. The representation, why women are represented in that way, and that is not being dealt with. So the representation of female form in a symbolic order in which, in the last resort, it speaks castration and nothing else. To summarize briefly, the function of woman in forming the patriarchal unconscious is twofold. So you can mark this also. The first is she symbolizes the castration threat by her real absence of the penis, and second thereby raises her child into the symbolic. In order to make up for that lack of phallus, she raises her child into that symbolic presence. Once this has been achieved, her meaning in the process is an end. It does not last into the world of law and language, which is controlled by the patriarchal ideology, except as a memory which oscillates between memory of a maternal plenitude and memory of lack. The plenitude of mother's milk and so on, the joy, motherhood, and the memory of lack of phallus. Both are posited on nature or on anatomy in Freud's famous phrase. Woman's it's based on the anatomy. One is the lack of the male organ, and the plenitude, maternal plenitude. So both based on the anatomy of a woman's body. Woman's desire is subjected to her image as a bearer of a bleeding wound. The bearer of a bleeding wound on literal level about menstruation and so on, and on the symbolic level, she is castrated, the lack of phallus. So the image is that of a bleeding wound that she possesses always. She can exist only in relation to castration and cannot transcend it. She cannot cross that level. She turns her child into the signifier of her own desire to possess the female organ of the phallus, the condition she imagines of entry into the symbolic level, to the other level. Either she must gracefully give way to the word, or the name of the father, or the law. All this in patriarchal ideology, they symbolize power. That's what controls the world. So women struggle to get into that level, into that realm, but they fail, or else struggle to keep her child down with her in the half light of the imaginary. Here you can compare Lacan's imaginary phase and symbolic phase. Woman then stands in a patriarchal culture as signifier for the male other, bound by a symbolic order in which man can live out his fantasies and obsessions through linguistic command by imposing them on the silent image of the woman. Because language is controlled by patriarchal ideology or tainted by with patriarchal ideology, and it can be used against the silent image of woman still tied to her place as a bearer of meaning. She bears, his children and is a bearer of meaning, but not a maker of meaning. Who is responsible for that kid in him, her, growing in her? That's a man only. Likewise, that is the literal thing, and on the symbolic level, the man is the maker of meaning, or whatever you see, even in the narrative cinema, the maker of meaning is men and not a woman. There is an obvious interest in this analysis for feminists, a beauty in its exact rendering of the frustration experienced under the phallocentric order, and it gets us nearer to the roots of our oppression. So when you look closer, we are taken closer to the roots of our oppression, why we are oppressed, on what grounds. It brings an articulation of the problem closer. It faces us with the ultimate challenge: how to fight the unconscious, which is structured like a language. The unconscious is structured like a language, a very famous quote. Formed critically at the moment of the arrival of language while still caught within the language of the patriarchy. There is no way in which we can produce an alternative out of the blue. So a woman cannot create another set of rules and regulations for language or create something new, because language gives power. Language creates reality. So when this language is tainted with patriarchal ideology, the language, the meaning which is produced is also tainted with the patriarchal ideology. It is not free from patriarchy. And to examining, but we can begin to make a break by examining patriarchy with the tools it provides. So that is of a psychoanalysis, and in order to break it, we need to examine patriarchy with the same tool which the patriarchy offers us, of which psychoanalysis is not the only but an important one. It's not the only political weapon to analyze narrative cinema, but it is one of them, one of the important ones. We are still separated by a great gap from important issues for the female unconscious, which are scarcely relevant to the phallocentric theory. The sexing of the female infant and her relationship to the symbolic, the sexually mature woman as a non-mother, maternity outside the signification of the phallus, the vagina. But at this point, psychoanalytic theory as it now stands can at least advance our understanding of the status quo of the patriarchal order in which we are caught. So this political theory, this psychoanalysis actually help us to examine the status quo, or in order to understand the status, the current scenario. She acknowledges these alternative forms of cinema, but declares, she gives an alternative forms of cinema which is not under the control of patriarchy, and then she says that the formative and then moves on to say that this unconscious or patriarchal desires and the formative obsessions that center on a woman is how it is being represented in cinema. And then she moves on to state that the main intention of this essay is to analyze and destroy the pleasure produced by the visual and narrative structures of cinema by the tool of by using the weapon psychoanalysis. So this is the first part, the introduction part. Then part B is the destruction of pleasure, which is a radical weapon. So that we will see.